This is Sg2 Perspectives, a conversation with Sg2 experts and industry thought leaders about the biggest trends in healthcare and what we expect that's going to mean for the future of healthcare delivery.
Data storytelling is a critical skill that is needed to move from a strategy doer, an analyst, into someone who is directing, organizing, and inspiring others. We've done a lot of work this year in data storytelling, and we found that the audience spans the entire spectrum of the strategy team, and even those beyond strategy. We talk a lot about data storytelling for strategy, but it's also important for quality leaders, for operational leaders, for service line leaders.
Welcome to Sg2 Perspectives. I'm your host, Trevor DaRin. I have my colleagues, Rebecca Limestall and Janelle Kwan, with me to talk about data storytelling. Data storytelling is a new concept, at least from Sg2, to talk about with our members. Janelle and Rebecca have been the leaders of how we're working with members, what we're encouraging strategy teams to do here. And it's been a topic that's gotten such a positive reception. I wanted to have them here to give our perspective on it, give the background, and share some of the things they've learned from doing this work with members already. So Rebecca and Janelle, thanks as always for joining. Janelle, I'll start with you. Give us the background. Like, what's data storytelling? Is this a healthcare strategic planning specific concept? When did it cross your radar first? Give us a backstory of where data storytelling came from.
We heard from a lot of members that they had access to more data than ever before, but they struggled to fully realize the benefits of that data. The issue is that many of them were still playing the space of analysis, like pulling learnings from the data, but not necessarily translating that into action. And that's where we found there's a unique role for data storytelling. And what distinguishes data storytelling as a practice is that it acts like a form of persuasion. It uses learnings from the data and through storytelling, skills we've honed, and visuals to get people to not only learn from the data, but to also use it to make informed decisions. In this universe where we're in the midst of this data revolution, as we get access to more and more data, there are going to be more situations that require us to be able to distill that learning as storytellers.
Data storytelling itself is a skill that we've known has been needed, but to Janelle's point, it's even more so now. And we've all been in meetings where somebody has droned on and on and on and given you a ton of data. And I hope that person droning on and on hasn't been us, but if so, apologies. But there's been meetings where we've heard so much data and you get to the end and you go, now what? What do we do with this? And the point about data storytelling being for persuasion, for action, is what we're talking about here. It distills the data, the analysis, down to the core pieces that are important to drive a group or your audience into a decision.
Talk about how you've worked with members on data storytelling. You both have a natural educational style. This is a skill, I think, where there's a huge range of folks who are great at it and skill building opportunity for others, especially more junior folks who have been really analytically focused, turning data into insights. How are we working with members around data storytelling?
Data storytelling is a critical skill that is needed to move from a strategy doer, an analyst, into someone who is directing, organizing, and inspiring others, usually in that manager to director type of level as they're shifting their roles. Now, that being said, we've done a lot of work this year in data storytelling, and we found that the audience spans the entire spectrum of the strategy team, and even those beyond strategy. We talk a lot about data storytelling for strategy, but it's also important for quality leaders, for operational leaders, for service line leaders. Being able to inspire folks to action through data is a critical component for all those folks. An interesting tidbit as we ran the course, it became a level playing field across all the different leaders. And the most senior leaders had just as much to learn as some of the most junior folks when it came to the data storytelling. They were far more sophisticated with the strategies themselves. But data storytelling, we still have a lot to learn to be able to pull the pieces out and reduce it to the most simplest form of the story.
Rebecca and I are natural teachers. That's where our mind naturally turns. And so we were excited. It was an offering that we launched earlier this year, as Rebecca alluded to the course. And we really thought of data storytelling, building that skill is something you have to harness over time. And we tried to be methodical about how across levels, bands, or functions could you be able to develop and nurture those skills. And I think we think of it as 4 core steps that reinforce and build upon one another. The first is this idea of scoping. In our work day to day, we field all manner of requests, some more ambiguous than others. So what sort of questions can we ask to be able to wrap our arms around why does someone want data? What type of data is of interest? And how do they ultimately plan to share learnings from that data?
For this first skill of scoping, this is where so many organizations get off track. They don't ask the why, and so they're chasing all this data and going down these different paths without understanding what they're trying to get at. What's the next step, Janelle?
Once you have the data in front of you, feel like you have the right set of data, it's about how do I distill learnings from it? And when we talk about learnings here, it's not just what did I pick up from it, but it's what are some of the storylines and themes that weave together. That's the backbone of data storytelling, is some of those initial narratives. And then we think that next step, which is often the hardest one for organizations, it's how do we share the most important learnings from that data and build a narrative around it. There are lots of different frameworks out there. At Sg2, we love using the traditional story format because it's intuitive. We learned it pretty early on, and I think there's a visual element to that forces us to reckon with. We're telling a story.
As we look at getting too much data and getting lost in the weeds is one of the challenges or the perils that many of our strategy leaders face. Most folks don't spend enough time in that preparation and outline stage of thinking through their narrative and planning their time, whether it's going to be on stage, in an important meeting, even with their boss. How are they going to conduct that and think through that narrative? And then what's the fourth step?
The fourth step is really about once we have this vision or outline in mind, how do I prepare to actually share that story with our audience? So for us, we really think this is as much about preparation as execution. How do we think about our audience? Who is in the room? What roles they have? How can we integrate both presentation techniques, but also visuals, graphs, charts to help illuminate that story? So we really think of those suite of skills. They build upon one another, allowing us to be thoughtful about when do we need to use data storytelling and how do we ultimately share a story that convinces people to act, inspires and compels them.
And that narrative framework is one that comes from our earliest days in childhood and even are considered the foundations of a culture of being able to tell stories. So if you think about, let's say, the children's fairy tale of Little Red Riding Hood, it sets up, there's Little Red Riding Hood, you're introduced to the main characters, you're given the path that you're going to start walking through the woods. That's starting to build your case. It's starting to tell you what's going to happen next. You feel the drama rising as she runs into the big bad wolf and he runs ahead of her to grandma's house. And if you remember from the story from there, he eats grandma. And when Little Red Riding Hood arrives, we get to the climax of the story. We get to the big reveal where she walks in and says, oh, what big eyes you have, what big ears you have, what big teeth you have. And then Little Red Riding Hood screams, realizing it's the big bad wolf. In the version I like to tell my children, a hunter comes, flips the wolf over, and grandma pops right out completely unharmed. And that is part of the resolution of the story. And of course, the next steps are in looking at happily ever after, because that's what the next steps of every fairy tale is. But when we apply that same framework to data storytelling, what we're doing is we set it up. We might be talking about virtual visits. We might be talking about utilization. We might be talking about the finances of the organization. You set it up with the context, introduce the characters. You start building the case towards what you need them to recognize, the aha moment. That aha moment comes through data. What is the most important element that we want to reveal to them? Perhaps it's that access is being challenged. Our leakage data is really high. Perhaps it's that we've been challenged in the ability to capture some of the growth that's out there. Or on the flip side, there's growth out there that we are doing amazing at, and we need to build upon it. Then we move into the now what, the recommendations. Maybe that's part of the facilitation of the group, or maybe we're prescribing that to the group. And then we finish up with the next steps. Never leave a meeting without next steps. So that's how this correlates to that narrative framework as we start applying Little Red Riding Hood to perhaps healthcare strategy.
All right, a couple follow-up questions. One, have you come up with any ground rules as you've gone through this? Like no more than 3 data points on a slide, or never use a chart that has 80% of the data you're not going to talk. Like, are there a couple ground rules that you've come up with that have been really tough pivots?
Yeah, we've set for each of the steps, we have ground rules to illustrate what does best practice look like. When they're analyzing the data, we give them just a handful of questions to work with. And these questions force finding relationships between different pieces of data, and it forces choice. I think we have a more is more mindset at times, really forcing to figure out what is critical to our story versus what is supplemental or perhaps belongs in appendix is really critical. When they're formulating the narrative and then when they go to present it, we have a lot of recommendations around how that information should be presented. No more than 1 to 2 pieces of data on a slide. Use a build. Make sure that you set up your audience because we live in the data. We know it. It's intuitive. Our audience isn't that. So what can we do to make it abundantly clear and to bring them along with us on each step? How can we use elements like lead lines or visuals to help further reiterate what we're trying to share, but almost like a check for understanding so the audience knows where are we? Rebecca, there are countless others. Maybe we have too many rules.
Less is more. That is the biggest thing that we need to recognize when we're doing data storytelling, that the longer it takes somebody to orient themselves to what we're showing them, that's more time that they're not paying attention to what we're saying. And we need them focused on what we're saying, how we're going to push this conversation forward. We do tell folks the appendix is your friend. Use it as a security blanket if you want. Put all your analysis in there and then, quite frankly, cut it before you get on stage, before you move to that final meeting. You have it if you need it, but there's no reason for everybody to see it if it's not core to the story that you're trying to tell and you're trying to bring people along with.
You know who does an amazing job of this as you're talking through? Adam Grant, who's PhD, professor at Wharton, has a great podcast. He's done a bunch of TED Talks. And even though he's always talking about data, he almost never even gives the specific number. He'll say like, what we learned is this is more than this, or like, this is really similar to this. As a listener, it's very easy to get the key takeaways of the story. And I don't care if it was 75% to 80%. I'm relying on his interpretation of what's different and significant. It allows him to tell a really detailed story and have in-depth takeaways that are totally grounded in data. And I don't hear a number the whole time. It's really impressive. And it's something I have tried to mirror. What takeaways have you started to, we build data presentations all the time. What have you noticed in your own work that you've been able to change easily? Or what's the hard stuff that you keep working on?
I would love to get to a point where I feel completely comfortable with 0 slides, that we could give a full data story with no slides, no visuals, or just a couple of points on a slide. I don't think a lot of us are there yet. I don't think a lot of our health system leaders are there yet in terms of interpretation and being able to take that in. That being said, that's the type of story that it needs to get to, of being able to move forward so well to the point of persuasion that we'd love to get there. Janelle, what about you?
I would love to get a point where our ratio between the qualitative aspects of it and the quantitative, the numbers, have more balance or equity between them. I think we're still at a point where for every kind of qualitative example, we have maybe 4 or 5 data points. So I'd like to see more balance to the Adam Grant method of take away the big key themes, but don't fixate as much on the specific number. People get distracted by them. What they're asking you is, why is that important? What is that telling me more broadly? And how can I apply that?
And Janelle and I work together a lot. One of the things that we've gotten to do is we start challenging each other since we've been doing this work of, can we cut more out of this story? Can we make this cleaner? Can we make this storyline crisper? What data points do we really need here? And we have found that teams that get a common language around what's critical and how to communicate that with each other can help streamline those presentations as well.
That's really good. I was anticipating you saying, we've seen your decks and they haven't gotten any better. They still have tons of data points in them.
We all still love our data. And actually, that is one of the things we talk with every level of an individual who has participated in our data storytelling or who we've spoken with. They want to tell it all. They want to show it all. Their team has crunched the data. They have done the pages and pages of analysis. They've done all the SWOT. They've done the interviews. They want people to see the amazing work because it's so important to how they developed and got to their perspective and opinion. But the audience may not care. They just need that endpoint. They need what it is we're getting to. And that's actually something we spend a lot of time talking about, as well as truly understanding your audience. And your audience could be multiple levels. It could be your boss, your CEO, and then the board. Perhaps your boss is going to present to the board. Perhaps it's directly to an executive team, whoever you're presenting to or sharing that information with. We talk about having 3 major goals outlined and identified with the audience. One is, what do you need them to do to be able to get out of that session? Do we need them to be able to know about something? Is it education? Do we need them to make a decision? What is it we need them to do? The next question is, how do we want them to feel? You can present that same financial slide, sharing where you might be as an organization with, we got to light a fire under all of us and we got to get this moving. We got to work together. Or it could be very much we're all in this together, or we've got this. There's different vibes and feelings and experiential goals that you might want to accomplish. And then finally, it's what do you need to get out of it? As the presenter, as the head of whatever team you're on, the strategy team, what is it you need to get out of that meeting? Is it buy-in? Is it sign off? Is it ideas? Where do you want to go with? So those are the 3 goals that we ask for folks to think about with their audience.
Part of it is not just understanding your audience, but also figuring out more broadly what situations are well suited for data storytelling when we're working with data. We all use data constantly, and there's a lot of times we use it simply to inform, providing someone an update on work that's underway, showing that the trend data is continuing in the same direction, serving just baseline to educate someone. But there's situations where we learn something unique that requires further discussion. We need something out of someone, whether it's a resources commitment or decisions. And those are the situations that are especially well suited for sharing learnings as a storyteller. I think that's important to distinguish. I think the last thing we want was you to say, every single time I use data, I need to go storytelling. Part of the magic is being really selective about when to use it and why.
So what you're saying is when your boss pings you on Teams and says, hey, what % is our market share for X, Y, and Z, that you shouldn't tell a story, but the answer is probably 35.
Yes, we don't need a 30-minute meeting for me to unpack this.
Yeah, sometimes I just want the meal to taste good. I don't need you to explain why you cut the carrots diagonal versus this way. Just make it taste good.
That's an amazing reference.
All right, you each get one key takeaway, something unexpected that you saw, heard, learned in going through this work with a variety of health systems. Rebecca, what's yours?
We've hit upon it a bit, but the piece that surprised me is even in a fictitious example, as we're going through skill development, how much folks don't want to cut data out. They want to include it all. And even when it's low stakes and we don't have the weddedness to it. So it just challenges us to keep that as a constant reminder of what can we cut? We don't need all this information.
I think what we learned both in our research and in running the course is that this is a skill. In what scenarios you may use it may be a product of your function or role, but it's a universally applicable skill. We had the pleasure of having all variety of functions, roles, and titles in our course, and that was something that came across clearly. The other thing I would add to it is, Trevor, you and I have been doing some broader research on the role of strategy and how it's evolved. And I think something we've come across is they really are the infrastructure of the organization. They have relationships, they anchor the cultures. Who better than strategy to be the pathway for building cultures and organizations that are astute storytellers?
To be a master communicator, you've got to be able to take the data, to take the reality and turn it into something that's going to create action. And that's what we're asking a lot of our strategy leaders to do.
I think about it as you got to be memorable. Someone has to think back later that day or the next week and be like, I remember the way Rebecca explained this and the key takeaway. And that's hard to do. It's hard to do what we do, and it's hard to do what strategy teams do. I love the way you've outlined this. I love the work you get to do with members around it. And thanks so much for sharing what you've learned through the process.
And Trevor, if you want to hear more data storytelling in action, our recent Impact of Change podcast was a really good one.
Great point. We strive to do that through all of our podcasts. Appreciate that plug. Thank you both. Always value your perspective.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks for listening. If you like this episode, please subscribe, rate, and review us, and or follow us on Twitter and LinkedIn at Sg2 Healthcare. And if you want to talk more about innovative healthcare strategies, you can always email me at sg2perspectives@sg2.com. Finally, SG2 is a Vizient company, and there are a bunch of Vizient podcasts that you might like. You can find them at Vizient /podcasts. Have a great day.